This is Priorities in Sefira number 6, and we're going to deal with the early minyan. Every single day of the year, as you can see on the screen, it is permissible to daven mincha before Plag HaMincha and Maariv after Plag HaMincha. The Shulchan Aruch does not take a stand on the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim as to when is the earliest time you can daven Maariv, and therefore, if you so choose, as long as you're consistent that day, according to many poskim, then you can daven mincha before Plag HaMincha and Maariv after Plag HaMincha. So, for sake of argument, if Plag HaMincha is at 5:48, you daven mincha at 5:30, and you can daven Maariv at 5:49. However, how does that translate into Sefira? Can you count Sefira at Maariv? You're saying Kriyat Shema. You're also saying the Maariv Shmoneh Esrei. Can you also count Sefira? So, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Hamitpalelim hatzibur miba'od yom, if you daven Maariv with the congregation earlier than darkness, monei mahem below bracha, you actually count with them at the early Maariv minyan, but without a bracha. Ve'im yiskor balayla, but if you remember at night, namely after dark, that hey, I counted Sefira at the early minyan, albeit without a bracha, yivarech ve'yispor, you should then make a bracha and count the Sefira. That's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch used the term mi be'od yom, namely an early Maariv. The question is, what did he mean? And there's two options as to what he may have meant in those words, mi be'od yom. According to the Mishnah Brura, in his Mishnah Brura, namely the Chafetz Chaim's initial interpretation upon the Code of Jewish Law, he says, and I quote his words, Yesh, quoting many poskim, Shepirshu, Dahainu ben Hashmashos, the Sefira and the Sefira, the Sbanazeh miderabanan. Says the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't mean Plag HaMincha, he means twilight. Twilight is the time between sunset and dusk, and during that time, since it's what we call Safek Yom, Safek Laila, it might be night, but it might be day. Since today, according to most poskim, Sefira Omer is rabbinic, you can be mekel that maybe it's indeed nighttime, Safek derabanan lekula, a doubt in a rabbinic mitzvah you can go lenient, and therefore you can count Sefira during twilight. However, it does not mean you can count Sefira earlier at Plag HaMincha, which is about an hour and a quarter before sunset or before dusk. Indeed, in the Biru Halacha, he says explicitly that according to what I wrote in the Mishnah Brura, in the name of all these poskim, umashma mihem demi Plag HaMincha lechole alma eno yacholim not. Namely, you're supposed to count Sefira at darkness. We're mekel at Ben Hashmashot. There's even a Tosfot that says it might be better from Ben Hashmashot because it's better tmimot, it's pure. It's like mamish at the beginning of the day as much as possible. But, hey, within reason, not beyond sunset. That's the earliest possible time. And indeed, the Maharshal, Rav Shlomo Luria, says explicitly, Bechol, during the weekdays, Anu mitpalalim arvit vekorim kriyat shma biplag hamincha ve'en sofrin ad halayla. Indeed, during the week, we have an early Maariv minyan. We daven Shmoneh Esrei, we say Kriyat Shema, but we don't count Sefira Omer. At the end of that minyan, ultimately, you go ahead and you announce, everyone counts Sefira at home after darkness. It seems to me that this is also the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, because literally, in the next seif, he says explicitly the famous halacha that you should not tell someone that today is X, namely after dark. If someone says, hey, what night of Sefira is it? You shouldn't say it's night 22, because if you say it's night 22, maybe you counted Sefira, and you didn't count it in the proper way that it says in the Siddur. You should say, yesterday was 21, and he'll get the hint. But he says, and I quote his words, that if someone asks you that question, Ben Hashmashot, that's the halacha. Aval kodem Ben Hashmashot. But before twilight, namely any time before sunset, from our perspective, Plag HaMincha, kevan she'eino zman Sefira, ein bekach klum. So therefore, at Plag HaMincha, at the minyan itself, right after the minyan, you said Kriyat Shema, you daven Maariv already, you could say, don't forget to count Sefira, tonight is 22. No more and no less, because it's impossible to count Sefira before Plaga Mincha. So the first opinion in the Mishnah Berurah is that indeed the earliest possible time that you can count Sefira is what we call twilight, ben hashmashot, between sunset and night. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch meant, that during that time, if the minyan davens, you should indeed count with them without a bracha, and if you remember at night, count with a bracha. However, the same Mishnah Berurah wrote another perush on the Code of Jewish Law called the Biur Halacha. And in the Biur Halacha, he brings another point of view. And that point of view is, Harbe Achronim, many Achronim, have interpreted that this actually means Plaga Mincha, namely, that indeed you can count from Plaga Mincha, just like you daven Kriyat Shema and you daven Shmoneh Esrei of Maariv. You can also count Sefira, and for the same reason, Sefira is only the Rabbanan, maybe a minus the Rabbanan, a Zecher LaMikdash. So you could be makel that the time that you call night for Maariv is good enough for the time for Sefira as well. And the Piskei HaTosfot agrees, as you can see on the screen, says explicitly the following words. Yesh b'nei Adam, be'od shehayom gadol, there are people that when the day is still day, namely it's still light outside, Plaga Mincha, sofrim below bracha u'balayla mevarchin. They count without a bracha, but then at night they count with a bracha. Says our Tosfot, ve'ein nir'eh. This is not a good practice. They already have fulfilled their obligation by counting from Plaga Mincha. De'ein brachot me'akvot ve'have bracha levatala. And secondly, since the bracha does not impinge upon fulfilling the mitzvah, therefore, if they count at night, their bracha is bracha levatala, it's a blessing in vain. You can do what the Shulchan Aruch says, but earlier from Plaga Mincha. So, of course, the ramification between these two opinions is going to be very simple. Can or should you, at the early Maariv minyan, count Sefira? According to the first interpretation of the Mishnah Berurah, absolutely not. It is so not time of Sefira that you can even say, tonight will be 22, and you can still count at night with a bracha. But according to the Biur Halacha, the second interpretation, then indeed, that might be the time of Sefira, so you should be machmir and say, yesterday was 21.